Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode, we speak to Jolané Kotzé about ADHD from a speech therapist perspective. Jolané, welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you on board. Thanks very much for doing this. And I think so today we're going to be talking about ADHD from a speech therapist point of view. So firstly, thank you very much for coming on board. And maybe just to kick it off, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so intrigued with ADHD.
Okay, so I've been a speech therapist for a little while now, and I like both being a speech therapist and working in the academics. So I'm also a part-time lecturer and supervisor for students. And I think my interest in ADHD has grown over the years because I have a sister with ADHD and quite a lot of friends, and that ADHD population makes up quite a big portion of the patients that I see, either with the students or at my own practice.
Okay, that's interesting. So tell me, is it a lot more prevalent now? Because it seems to be popping up everywhere. I mean, I think my wife was in a conference recently, and I mean, it's quite a big one because it's like spans over a few days, and it's not just one country. It seems to me like multiple countries. But in your experience, is it something that's kind of gotten worse over time, or is it just that we become more aware as a community and people?
I think it's so difficult. I think as medicine progresses and we have a better understanding of our own physiology as humans, a lot of new diagnoses pop up, and sometimes there is a tendency to overdiagnose because we know that this diagnosis encompasses these symptoms. But I think it is more prevalent, not always correctly diagnosed, because sometimes you just have something that you don't understand yet. And it seems to be easier to grab onto something that we have some knowledge of and something that we are able to treat at the moment, instead of trying to grab in the dark at something you don't understand. So definitely more prevalent. And I think that's a good and a bad thing. The more prevalent it becomes, the more uninformed opinions there are of it. But the good thing is, the more prevalent it becomes, the more parents and people with ADHD actually connect with one another and understand themselves and their children a lot better.
So I actually really like that you said that there's almost sometimes things get dumped into a blanket diagnosis. And just thinking back to, when I was little, you'd heard of ADD or ADHD, and generally it was the kid that was bouncing off the walls, and then they were the Ritalin babies. Are you finding now that there's a lot more awareness around ADD or ADHD, that there is more, how would I phrase it? There's more structured treatments now than just throwing Ritalin at the problem?
I think you are right in a sense, that usually it would have been the children that's bouncing off the walls, but now we have more insight into ADHD, and we know that ADHD isn't just equal to hyperactivity. There are other symptoms and parts of it that actually also form part of the diagnosis. And you can even have a child that's inattentive in their own little world that would have previously been seen as ADD, that is also classified as ADHD. So there is definitely a better understanding of it. And I like that you say throw Ritalin at the problem, because I think that is the misconception that most people have about it. But in the end, ADHD is really only successfully treated when we combine approaches, when we combine a medical approach like medication, for example, with some other behavioral approaches like speech therapy, occupational therapy. And that's the only way that we are able to successfully treat this child that we see.
Yeah, I'm smiling because Shaz had an incident with a cat recently, and there's another cat that's there's another cat that's kind of strolling across the screen there.
I
But
see.
you can see her arm,
For
but
shame.
that's so funny. So once before, we actually had an OT on that was talking about it from a, like, and as you said now, there's multiple. I think it can't just be, as Shaz said, Ritalin baby. It can't just be medicine. And she was talking from a sensory point of view. How they could almost like use a sensory approach, with the patients. And I think from a speech point of view, obviously that probably makes it a bit easier as well. But have you seen clients or patients where they're not on medicine? And I mean, do you see a major difference between being on meds or being on medicine or not for your patients? I mean,
I think the thing we have to understand about ADHD is that it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So there are some sort or some part of the neurological system that functions differently than someone without ADHD. So the thing is that often in therapy, it's either just medication or either just therapy. And I have truly found that in therapy, if we work with a child that isn't treated holistically and completely, that you almost work against the child's neurological system, and you try to do something that the child's neurological system isn't ready for. So often the medication just helps to get the child to that point where they are able to learn and able to take in and make sense of the stimuli that surrounds them all the time. So I found that it's almost like trying to teach them to ride a bike, but you never actually give them the bike. You just give them the recipe the whole time. So it works sort of against each other. It really has to work in unison and in combination with one another.
I really like that you said that you gave that example. I mean, anybody who's watched The Big Bang Theory knows that Sheldon learned to swim by, he did all the lessons by swimming on the floor. But
Yes.
It does make sense. The medication is almost the tool, but the guidance is what comes from the other therapies. So the medication helps you to reach the point where you can accept that guidance, and you need the two to work together. Otherwise, you're either going to go into one direction or the other, but you're never actually going to solve the problem. Another thing that you said is it's neurodevelopmental. So a term we keep hearing is neurotypical or neurodiverse. Would a person with ADHD be considered as neurotypical or neurodiverse?
Those terms, I think I'm one of the therapists that really don't like those terms, because if I just think about myself, my own neurological system functions differently than the person next to me. And it's not that I'm neurotypical or neurodiverse or whatever the term may be. So I just like to say that they have this special power, that they have this special package in their neurological system that just regulates and processes emotions, attention, external stimuli differently than someone else who doesn't have ADHD. So it doesn't make them not normal or not typical. They just function in a different way than someone without it. But then again, I also function in a different way. Sometimes I think I have a little bit of OCD, which is different than my husband, for example. We clean the house in different ways. So I think, I tend to steer away from those terms, if that answers your question.
That answers it brilliantly. So she has decided she's going to bring her A book and ask all of the difficult questions. But we did hear that, and I must admit, the first time I heard even neurotypical, I couldn't get my mind around that whole term of neurotypical, because some people, some parents in the classes used to call, because when our daughter was going to school, and they would say, no, these kids are normal and these kids are neurodiverse, or it was always weird for me. But then you went on the other extreme, and you said, the kids with ADHD now have a superpower. That's even more intriguing for me, based on the whole comic and superhero kind of, realm that Shaz and I like. But so do you think then it is, so it's not a bad thing, it's probably a good thing that they do have ADHD, but on the flip side, they do need to, you know, like Superman, he does need to kind of control his superpower or else he destroys everyone. Is that how it?
Definitely.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. That's
That's
very,
how
very
I see
cool.
it.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm kind of seeing how how your special interest is in ADHD, but that sounds very cool. I don't think I've heard it like that before. Because I did ask someone, but this was more on the autistic side, you know, when I said, you know, when I think of Rain Man, you know, I always think, you know, that's probably the worst, you know, example. But with ADHD, which, you know, what seems to be it's just like a slight edge. And it kind of works based on what I've seen as well, you know, because lots of the really good entrepreneurs and business leaders, they all profess to have some level of ADHD, you know, and that's what keeps them motivated and going and stuff like that, which is actually really cool to
Yeah,
know.
my own sister, who has ADHD, she is academically, she performs so well. She is doing her master's degree in biochemistry now. She's accepted for her PhD. So they sometimes just have this magical superpower of being able to process so many different things at the same time. And I almost say they're almost like a sponge. They just want to keep on learning. Sometimes you just have to provide them with the tools to do that.
I love that that's the phrase you used. You know, sometimes a person with ADHD is like a sponge, and, you know, depending on where their area of interest is, they just want to soak up everything that they can about that area of interest. So with that in mind, you know, is there a specific treatment plan that you kind of follow with patients on ADHD? Or is it something that is more determined by the individual? You know, again, and I'm using the phrases because so often we hear of almost these cookie cutter therapies, you know, okay, so you're depressed, so you need to do this, or, you know, you need, with ADHD and them having so many different areas that maybe the child or the person has strengths and weaknesses in, how do you formulate a treatment plan for this person then?
I think to understand the treatment plan, we have to understand that ADHD is highly comorbid with communication impairments. That's like one of the top comorbidities that ADHD or people with ADHD have. So they struggle a lot with understanding language, using language, and especially social language use. So you would always find a child or a person with ADHD trying to dominate the conversation, trying to talk about a lot of different topics in a short period of time. So our treatment plan for the language aspects, there are obviously certain approaches and techniques that are shown by research to work for the specific language issues and areas of difficulty. But overall, therapy is always an individualized process. So whatever this patient comes with, their little package, we try to sort them out as their own individual instead of trying to enforce our ideas onto them. But there are obviously certain things in our treatment protocol that remains the same. So stuff that has been shown to work that, for example, regulates attention, like using visual schedules or using breaks in between activities. And something we often tell teachers or parents to do at home as well is what we call task modifications. So instead of giving a 3-part instruction, maybe break the instruction up into 3 individual instructions. And then maybe instead of just using your voice, use another modality like visuals or gestures. And just these tiny little modifications have shown to decrease frustration and increase motivation in children with ADHD. So to answer your question, treatment is definitely individualized, but we do use some techniques and approaches sort of on all of the kids that we see, because research has shown that those are the most effective ones to use.
And we were reminded in another interview, actually, you know, speech, it's not just about talking. it's also about understanding. So I think what you're saying right now is such a key component of it. It was like, can the child actually understand the instructions? And I think what you're saying is like, split it out so that they can actually understand, because that's the communication part. But it's actually interesting. So do you find with patients with ADHD, do they struggle to talk well, or is it that they're almost like too distracted to talk? It's almost like, this, yeah, it's like, they can't understand me anyway, so I'm not going to tell them about it. Is that something that you find?
I think there's a spectrum of it. So I want to say the severity of the ADHD depends, and it influences the amount of risk for a language disorder. So the more intense and severe ADHD is, the more likely they will have they will be to have a language impairment. So sometimes we get children with ADHD that is just like you say, they just have too many things to say, and often it happens that they forget what they were saying, then they find something new that's interesting, or they feel demotivated to talk because people are always reprimanding them, always telling them, slow down, this is not how we say it. So it really depends on the severity of the ADHD and how severe the language impairment that accompanies the disease is.
Okay. So this is more a personal question, but our daughter, I mean, like, so whenever we go visiting, I mean, she's always talking a lot. So is it like partly nervousness as well, or is it just like they can't control themselves?
Oh, I think you do get children that just have no filter and everything needs to come out as soon as they think about it. I myself, I'm like that. I just continue talking. My parents always said that I was a babbelbakkie in Afrikaans, like a chatterbox.
Cool.
So it depends if there's any other issues involved. So there are some issues and some areas of difficulty that can cause a little bit of, I want to say, awareness of speech and awareness of communication, and then just having to sort of push through it as quickly as I can, say everything I want as quickly as I can so that I don't get judged on it.
So when you decided you were going to become a speech therapist, your parents probably weren't too surprised then.
I think I always wanted to become a doctor, and I think they always thought that's not going to work. She has no bedside manner. So I think a speech therapist is the best job for me.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And with your clients, do you find that there's a certain amount of time? So probably I want to ask it in two ways. One is, do you find there's an optimal time when patients should be seeing a speech therapist? Would be the first part. And then the second part would be, how long do you think normally a patient would be with you as a speech therapist? Because I'm assuming the best approach is when they come in really early, right? Because I mean, that's when they're probably going to find that they're struggling with either understanding or speaking.
Yes, so research has shown that the earlier we start, the better, because the older a child gets, the more demands they are in the academic system that almost takes up all of the language that they possess. So we want to provide them with the necessary skills to meet those demands as soon as we can. But that being said, I think of all of the medical professions, we are the ones who have a long-term relationship with our patients. So speech therapy is not a quick fix. It doesn't happen quickly. It's not like physio where you can work on a muscle and stretch a muscle, and after 2 or 3 sessions, you don't have to go back. Speech therapy really is a long-term investment, and we see patients for months up until years. So it depends on the patient's progress and how quickly they are able to function independently in their environments as successful communicators. And once they are able to do that, we are ready to step back.
That's interesting, because someone reminded me, I think it was another episode as well, is Because you would think, especially as a parent bringing the child in, that, the metric would be the child speaking. But, what she reminded us was that actually it takes a while for them to almost get to that moment and then they start speaking. But as someone looking at it, as a parent looking at this and going for speech therapy for like a month, 2 months, and the child is still not, with our amateur, view on the world, looking at this and saying, oh, why is he still not talking? And that's kind of the metric. Do you find many of those issues with parents or people looking at patients?
Definitely. And I think that's why it's such an important part of our jobs to manage parents' expectations and to always be open and honest about our goals and the progress that we are making. Because speech and language is like the most complex fine motor skill that the brain can possibly possess. There's no other skill as complex as learning language and coordinating the movements necessary for speech. So we have to manage parents' expectations in that sense and really be open about the steps that's needed in order to achieve certain goals. And yeah, I think once we are open about it and we are open about the process and we include them in the therapy process, they quickly understand that we are going to be a part of their family for quite a while, and then they love us, hopefully.
I love that you say that, they are going to be a part of you're going to be a part of their family for a long time, because, I've got a friend who has a slight stutter, and to this day, I mean, he's 37, and every now and then, the moment things get a little bit more stressful, he'll actually say, okay, I need to go back and see my speech therapist, because somewhere along the line, I need to learn a new coping or a new way, otherwise that stutter comes back. So seeing a speech therapist could actually become almost a lifelong relationship, because as you grow up, certain things might change and you would need to go back for a top up, or go back to learn or get new tools to now deal with the new environment. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. I think we go through this thing where we discharge patients like maybe early primary school because we feel that they are able to cope with the demands of the system. But as soon as they hit high school, for example, and to just think about the complex language tasks that's in the curriculum in grade 8 and upwards. I mean, think about having to write an essay, the type of language skills that you need in order to actually complete that task. So once they sort of hit high school, we tend to see them again a little bit more. So I think what parents also realize is as speech therapists, we have an extremely close relationship with our patients and their parents and their family members. And we almost celebrate all of their successes. We cry when they are sad or when they hit a wall. So everything that they are going through, we are feeling. It's not always great to bring your work home that way, but that is the job of a speech therapist. You can't be a speech therapist and not be involved. And once you have that relationship with a family, they are so much more open to coming back to you whenever they need you and realizing firstly when they need your help again.
Yeah, so Shaz is definitely bringing a game. That was actually a really cool way to, it actually reminded me of a friend of mine that I had, and he used to stutter, but I never, it never clicked, asking about stuttering. But, in primary school, he struggled. Like, and he would get so nervous that, you would start crying even, if we had to do like speeches and stuff like that. And then in high school, it kind of just went away. I mean, the only introduction was girls and smoking, and for some reason, it kind of like he got so much better by like standard 8. Well, we had standards, but grade 10 or so, and yeah, it kind of went away. Where it wasn't such a big thing. Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting how you said like they need you at different stages, and I definitely think there was something about high school that you almost needed that additional assistance, and it's amazing. I don't think I've heard that as well, in terms of, speech therapist being part of like a long-term program, with the child, which actually makes a lot of sense now that you're saying it. For some reason, I just didn't think of it like that. I see a physio, for instance, as one of those people. Obviously, doctors, not so much pediatricians. Your family GP. But that's actually interesting that you said that. I do have another question. Now that we're talking about it, but so like accents, how does that fall part of like, like, do you find like, from a different geographic area? I mean, even in South Africa, I mean, like, we come from like a diverse country, and like it's accents is like such an interesting way. Is there? I mean, how does that actually form? Is that just because of the people that you're around?
Yes, so the thing is that learning language works in such a way that the child learns what they hear, and they learn from their language models in their immediate environment. So that's definitely how an accent is formed. It's because the child is so immersed in an environment where that's the type of speech, intonation and patterns and speech, the speech sounds that they hear. But yeah, dialects, I think there are speech therapists that want to fix it. I'm not one of them. I completely feel that dialect is something really special. And trying to change a dialect when the environment is still going to remain speaking the same dialect, it's really working against yourself. So it's an interesting question, and we have loads of dialects that we still have to, I want to say, research and just come up with the right assessments and treatments for those specific dialects. So hopefully in the future, we will be able to do more inclusive speech therapy where we understand something like dialects a lot more than we do at the moment.
I suppose my only comment would be, what would you fix it to? Because like
Yes,
it's like the
that's
UK
the
is supposed to,
thing.
because the UK is supposed to be English, but I mean, to
Mm,
understand most of the people in the UK or in England is pretty difficult for most people that speak English. And I mean, we have Australia and New Zealand, even American. I mean, like it's crazy how that would be.
definitely.
And I mean, for me, we went to Mauritius for a honeymoon, and then I went, twice on business trips. And Mauritius is like predominantly Indian, but during like the Indian people speak like French. In my mind, it's just like it just like doesn't work. So whenever I hear them
Exactly.
speaking, it's like something is wrong here. It's like almost like watching the wrong movie. Um,
That's so true.
um, but yeah, so we'll close off just now. Is there anything around ADHD and how you work as a speech therapist that you probably that we missed, and we probably should have asked you?
Um, Let me think. Now I have to think first. You are throwing difficult questions at me.
I know. So trust she has to set up like a late afternoon. First, she
I
sets it up on
think,
Friday the 13th, and then
yes,
like
it's
late
been due from
afternoon.
the start. I think something that we have to be open and honest about is the harsh reality of ADHD is that there is no cure for it. It is something that, although we don't necessarily understand it fully yet, we are on our way there. It is something that persists from childhood until adulthood. And research actually shows that it persists in plus minus 50 to 80% of cases. So I think we always have to be open and honest about the fact that this is something that a parent or a person themselves with ADHD is going to struggle with for their whole lives. And as soon as we are able to, we have to diagnose it and treat it as best we can in order to really manage the presentation that it has throughout a person's life. So I think that's the only point that I wanted to also just explain it a little bit more.
Yeah, again, I mean, that's interesting that you mentioned that. So it almost like seems like people don't really get over it. They are helped to cope with it better and maybe fit in a bit better, but it always shows in some way or the other. But what you said already, which I really like, is that it's a superpower, and they should
Yes,
almost like embrace it. So they should know.
definitely.
They should almost know when to take the cape out and when not to take the cape out, and make sure that everything is kind of safe around them. Chance, anything on your side before we close it up?
Just on that line of it's a superpower and it's always there. I mean, I think one of the most powerful lines from one of the Avengers movies is when Captain America asks Bruce Banner, what is your secret? How do you keep the Hulk under control? And he turns around and he says, my secret is I'm always angry.
Yes.
But when you think about it, somebody with ADHD, I always have ADHD. The fact of the matter is that is the superpower. That is what sets you apart from somebody else and gives you maybe an advantage in another area. I think we're moving more into an age now where you're not looking at things like ADHD or sensory integration or any of the taboo subjects from 20, 30 years ago as taboo anymore. We're starting to see them more and more in these are actually strengths, and they're being treated as I'm not trying to cure this because I can't cure this, but I'm trying to teach you how to get better with this, how to handle this. With great power comes great responsibility and all of that.
Yes, I
So
agree. And I think on that note, just the fact that you know that it is your superpower, you now know that there are other people who share your superpower. And that in its own is a superpower, having the ability to actually talk to someone else and experience what you are experiencing with someone else. So I think the more we become aware of it, the more we are open about what we are experiencing, and if we are old enough to actually say, hey, I have ADHD, that will engage much more conversation around it, and it will just connect people more and make people more understanding of it, so that we don't think about it as you said previously, the Ritalin children. We think about it as someone really interesting that shares, that knows a lot about a lot of stuff that we can learn from. Instead of looking at it in such a negative light.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the one question I think we probably didn't ask is so if someone is thinking of coming through for therapy, how would they work with you? I think so. So we're going to include your details, obviously, in the in the show notes, so people know how to contact you and all of that stuff. But for parents thinking of bringing a child in for speech therapy, and they probably have a diagnosis of ADHD already from the pediatrician or the psychiatrist or someone else, what can they expect, and how would you work with them?
Okay, so I always talk about the process that's involved, because it's obviously a big financial burden if you don't have medical aid. So you have to really understand what you're letting yourself in for. And so we would first start with an assessment, and we use multiple types of measures to assess, but whether it's formal tests that have been developed by researchers or informal measures where we use developmental norms. And then out of that assessment, we are able to determine the areas of difficulty that shapes our treatment plan. And from our treatment plan, we then use our specific approaches that's shown to work for these areas of difficulty. And it can be once a week, it can be twice a week, it can be for a few months, for a few years, and we can do it either in a group or individually. And then from there on, we just try to do our best and try to do as much as we can with the help of parents. That's the important part, is we see a child for 30 minutes a week most of the time. So we want to always try to encourage parents to become the therapist at home. So it's also a big responsibility on the parents' part to become part of the process and not just send the child to speech and hope it's going to get better.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, and that's kind of what's come up with lots of the therapists that do work with children is that they're almost the guy, they're the mentors. I mean, they give the skills and the knowledge, but it's actually the practice or the continuous exercise of doing the stuff that's the actual healing part or the improvement part. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because that kind of collaborates the story with most of the practitioners that we've had on that work with children. And I think so I'm glad you mentioned that. But this has been amazing. Thank you. I mean, again, it sheds some light on some superhuman qualities that most humans have, especially the little ones as they grow up. So I'm glad to have you on board. And Shaz, thanks on your side as well. I mean, you asked some really amazing questions, which is pretty cool. So hope to have you on board again, maybe in a multidisciplinary type approach. Because I think speech therapists definitely work really well with that, an OT and physiotherapist, maybe a psychiatrist, which would be amazing. What do you think?
I think that would be great. I mean, that is our jobs on a daily basis. we have friends in a lot of disciplines that we chat to every day, because that's really the only way to treat a patient, is by making sure that you work in a team and that everyone in the team is on board and share the same goals. So that's ultimately our goal in therapy. So thank you for having me. And thank you for being open to having me again.
No, it was a blast. It was amazing. And we learned a lot. I think that's the reason we do this, is Shaz and I learn a lot from everyone that joins us, and then we can ask some smart questions like Shaz did today.
You sound very smart for people who aren't speech therapists.
Thanks for saying that. That's really kind. Jolané, thank you very much. And then we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend and stay safe. I hope it's going to be a cold one again. I don't know if you are in Cape Town, but it's going to be cold.
No, we're not. I see you have your jersey on. It's boiling here, actually. I was actually just thinking, why do I have my jacket on?
But, where are you from then?
We're in Johannesburg.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Then you don't share the cold. Okay, that's fine.
No.
Enjoy your sunny weekend then.
Yeah, we get the dust and the pollen, you get the cold.
True, yes. We all have some sacrifices to make.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, although you can't beat Cape Town in terms of, really beautiful places to live. So I think
that's true. We are very fortunate.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.